Record. Okay, that's it. Over to you, Annabelle. If you just tell me when to go to the next page.
Okay,
Yeah.
yes, right. Can everybody hear me? Hopefully, good. Oh, you're all on mute, you can't say. Right, good evening. Hello, thank you so much for inviting me to talk. If you haven't met me before, I'm Annabel Drysdale, the manager of Forvie National Nature Reserve. And I hope you've all visited, surely, no excuse. I've been at Forvie since 2002, so quite a nice timescale to consider the changes that I've seen over the years, and think about whether they're related to climate change or not. I am very interested in the subject, first studying climate change back in the 1990s, and then revisited again 1999-2000 for my master's at University of Aberdeen. And climate change is now one of our top two priorities for Nature Scott, my employer. We've been tasked to kind of lead on educating and supporting Scotland to reduce the effects of climate change and mitigate. Nature Scott, by the way, we were Scottish Natural Heritage until last year, so there's been a name change. So back in the day, back at university, we talked about climate change on this global scale. We talked about the ice caps melting, about the Maldives getting flooded with rising sea level, the El Nino effect perhaps in the Eastern Pacific. 20 years on, when I was asked to speak about climate change at Forvie, what was my answer? My immediate answer was no, I can't. I know about the ice caps. I don't know what's happening at Forvie. So here I am. I hope you enjoy it. I've had a couple of months to try and get my head around, some of the things. I'm not promising you all the answers. It's still a very complicated science with a lot of modelling and a lot of guesswork. But in saying that, it's been in the back of my mind, obviously, for the last few years, seeing changes and thinking, are they attributable to climate change or what's going on? And I'm going to say it, my head has been in the sand a little, but being asked to do this talk and Nature Scott taking a greater emphasis on climate change has forced me to look into this. So I've been to some of my advisors within Nature Scott and asked for snippets from them. So this talk is a joint effort from a few people, and they've given me a few things to go away at and look at. And actually, maybe that's one of the issues with climate change, that the climate scientists are doing very high level stuff, and they know what they're talking about, and they're all perhaps looking at individual aspects of climate change, but then relating it down to us on the ground is not so easy. So yeah, I do like a challenge, don't I? I'll give it a go and perhaps just take you behind the scenes at Forvie and some of the aspects of the consequences of climate change that we might have to think about on the nature reserve. So I'll just talk for, I think, just about half an hour or so, so plenty of time for questions, comments, discussion, suggestions. I'm open to anything anyone has to say. There's probably, as I said, there's probably people in the audience that know little bits as well that can help. And I think we're quite well fitted for me to get involved with Newburgh Climate Action Group and the Sea Change project at Colliston at the other end. So the reserve will sit in the middle, and hopefully there'll be a flow and exchange of ideas and practical projects across the whole area. Okay, so we move on to the next slide, thanks. Now, to just set the scene, because this is how I currently manage Forvie, and how I currently manage it is, the framework that I will use when I start thinking about changes and what we can do. So the Nature Scott approach is to divide our daily reserve work into management for nature, funnily enough, management for people, which is what takes all the time and money, and management of the property, the buildings, the vehicles, the car parks, and so on. Splitting it this way also helps with us apportioning the funding as well to each of the different streams. Now, as the climate changes, as I've said, it'll be helpful for me to think about each of these different aspects of the management. There's crossover between the three, of course, as well. Now, within this structure, believe it or not, I can't just do what I like at Forvie. There are rules I have to follow and targets I have to meet. So I'll go into the protected species and habitat targets next, but some other examples of how I currently deal with things that come up, influenced by what we agreed in the reserve plan. We write 10-year reserve plans at the moment, and when the current reserve plan was written, it was with a lot of community engagement and involvement. Our own Forvie panel are particularly helpful in offering suggestions, so lots of people there representing local interests. Yes, following the community, I mean all sorts of experts, ornithologists and Marine Scotland and SEPA, all of these little things crop up, and we fit in with our partners to maybe make changes to the plan as it goes along. Other things such as access, of course, I can't actually just shut the door and say no people allowed. People do have the right of responsible access. We want to champion that and invite people in and demonstrate how access can work with nature, the two together responsibly. Of course, we also have the UK and Scottish Government biodiversity action plans and strategies, which are we have responsibilities to that. Our own corporate plan, which sets the direction for the business that I work for, although we are a public body. But fortunately, my job also allows me to take advantage of things that crop up. So, for example, I haven't been forced into this climate talk. This is something I wanted to do. So it's nice when I get the opportunity to to decide what I want to do myself. Okay, next slide, thanks. So these are the main ingredients for the recipe that is Forvie as it stands at the moment, and it is a little bit dry and a bit boring, but it is again just to set the scene of what I am obliged to do in my daily job at the Nature Reserve. So our statutory responsibility is to protect and enhance this list of species and habitats. These have all been decided by UK and Scottish Government through their advisory agencies such as ourselves. The National Nature Reserve, of course, contains the basic UK protection unit, the Site of Special Scientific Interest, the SSSI. And this protects the sand dunes themselves, some of the plants, most of the birds. We also have the European protection. But just going back, actually, worth noting, under the SSSI, Scotland decided to review its Site of Special Scientific Interest. And following that review at Forvie, the estuary, the Eithin estuary, was added in as what we call a feature of the SSSI. So it's sitting there, but nobody has yet actually decided what would constitute damage to the SSSI, to the estuary, what would be an offence. So that's an interesting one to watch when I go on to talk about the estuary later. At European level, so we've got the dune habitats and many of these birds that are threatened across the whole of Europe are on our list. That's I have to make sure that the population doesn't drop. We've also got worldwide designation. So Ramsar sites are found all across the planet, and Forvie's a Ramsar site. It's a wetland label, so it's important for the wading birds and the geese and the terns that in case of the Arctic tern, of course, is traveling the whole world, the longest migrating bird in the world. Now, these labels do have targets against them. So again, that sort of dictates how we know that we're keeping Forvie in good enough condition. For example, over the winter, on average, I need to maintain 1,020 eider ducks, which is very specific, but that's the average. That's a 5-year average. Maybe 8,000 wintering wading birds and 16,500 pink-footed geese. Now, some of those we are meeting, some perhaps not. Those are, as you can see, those are our hard and fast targets using the method that the whole of the UK uses to check that nature reserve protected areas are still fulfilling the job that they're supposed to. The problem with that, of course, is if the numbers change substantially through no fault of our own. So since the SSSI was reviewed, we have dropped hooper swan and grey lag geese off the list because at the time, back in the early 1980s, for example, the the figure was 200 Hooper swans, which we don't regularly track now on the Eithin, although November 2019, Daryl tells me there were 400 Hooper swans on the estuary for 1 week. But maybe that reflects that they're just passing through, and the Eithin's a very important stopping off place for these birds, but they are going somewhere else for the remainder of the winter. So anyway, it's not up to me to decide, it's up to other people to look at the figures, look at the data and decide which of these species still definitely belong at Forvie in high numbers. So if we go into the next one, I'll be able to show you how, what the figures are telling us. So this again is our sort of current state of things at Forvie, this method that we use to check how healthy the reserve is. It's called site condition monitoring, and again used all across the UK. So most of the tern species are doing quite well. In fact, the common tern there was last assessed several years ago. And in the most recent years, I think we have now increased our common tern numbers to well over 200 pairs every summer. So next time I assess that formally, I think common tern will join the list of sandwich, little and Arctic tern. And actually we have one of the healthiest ternaries in the UK, well, certainly in Scotland, over there. Now the little tern, it's slightly misleading as well. Our little terns, the rarest birds that we have at Forvie, about a third of the Scottish population of, that's about just over 30 pairs of birds, and highly persecuted by egg thieves, and really struggle to find places to nest elsewhere in Britain. While the little tern, we're still attracting little terns to Forvie, and in actual fact, in the last 5 out of 6 years, they've failed to produce any young that have made it to actually fly away from Forvie. So got a bit more work to do there to try and protect them. I'm not saying that's necessarily climate change. They certainly suffer from predation by oyster catcher, one particular oyster catcher. But they're also very prone to weather. The chicks are absolutely tiny, and if they get cold, wet weather at just the wrong time, that can finish them off. What else can I say? Eider ducks are probably my that's my biggest anxiety at the moment. We used to have the largest breeding population of eider duck in the UK, perhaps attracting 1,500 pairs in the 1990s. In 2019, we estimated from 1,500, we estimated 380 pairs, and we only found 97 nests in the part of the reserve that we were looking for them. So the eider ducks are doing very badly. They're doing very badly across the whole of Northern Europe. Some sites locally are they have good years, they have bad years, but the general trend for the eider duck is really quite disastrous. So that's a conversation that we need to have at European scale, because we can consider the local impacts, such as people, dog walking, the staff, how we monitor the eider ducks. Are we intruding on them? The feeding on the Eithin estuary, because they really rely on the mussel beds of the Eithin to feed and get in condition in order to breed. Foxes, all sorts of things, disease, parasites. These are all things that we've tried to investigate. We've had lots of student projects working on, but you can't help but think with the eider ducks, because the whole of Northern Europe's affected, is there something climate going on there? So the data tells us one thing. As I say, I've worked at Forvie for a while now, and Daryl Short, the other full-time member of staff, we've talked about this as well over the years, and have tried to make our own observations and perceptions of what we think might be changing at Forvie. I mentioned that the flower, of course, in the middle photograph there is Roseby willow herb. So this is an invasive species. It is a native species, but it is invasive on the dunes. And again, we're questioning whether it's spreading, relating to some change in the environment. But yeah, going back to our perceptions, if we go on to the next slide, this is what some of you may have seen just this winter. Or over the years. I mean, look at that, the massive sand sheet, which is the big bare sand dune that you can see from Newburgh. It's quite obviously moving and flattening compared to how it was. And it has, this winter, it's certainly now smothered completely an area that used to be used by nesting terns, not that long ago, certainly within my time at Forvie. Under the sand sheet was also one of our archaeological sites, the late Stone Age, where the hunter-gatherers spent time next to the estuary. They've left charcoal and evidence of fire there. So, of course, we know the Forvie landscape is very mobile and it has changed over the years. Can we assess? We can't really assess, perhaps even in our lifetime, how much change and whether that's going to be harmful to the character of the reserve or it's all part of the natural cycle. But it certainly makes it a very interesting place to work when, in the space of a couple of weeks, you see this amount of sand moving. Also makes my job a bit harder now. If I lose this particular path that is on all our maps and all our signs and all the way markers, if it suddenly disappears under that sand dune, Daryl's going to have a lot of digging to do to get those back. But perhaps those are minor inconveniences compared to some of the ecological troubles. Again, it's managing the reserve for people, which you see it takes more effort. I mean, also if we lose the parts of the dune system where these fantastic internationally important birds are nesting, we're going to lose them just through perhaps natural processes of the sand dunes. We can accept that, but it might take a while. If the birds don't really have anywhere else to go in Scotland, the population could crash quite badly. And even when the raised beach pebbles come back at Forvie, the population will have to build again, and small populations, as you know, are a lot more vulnerable to predation and weather and all sorts. So it is interesting to think about how the reserve changes, and that dune is protected almost, it's protected as much as the nesting birds. So we don't want to stabilize the dune. We can't interfere with what it's doing, and so we just have to let it do its thing. So then there's also this trade-off then between, looking at these numbers and the data at a fine scale year on year, but then also the longer term data set as well to try and show up changes which are not really human timescales, more natural timescales. Now, storm events are predicted to increase, and I don't know if you're aware, but the medieval village of Forvie was supposedly smothered by a storm in 1413. If this happens, more frequently, I don't think Colliston has too much to worry about, but let's hope not. The dunes seem quite stable at the north end. So also from my perception of being at Forvie and the amounts that we've spent and the trouble we've had with our paths, Daryl and I also suspected Forvie was getting wetter. If you go on to the next slide, this is what I'm talking about. This is an issue which my feeling was had increased since I started working on the reserve. This is our heath trail at the north end of the reserve, at least from the Forvie Visitor Centre round in a loop. And it just seems to us more and more often this is what's happening. There's the blue dotted line, that's where the path actually goes. But following heavy rainfall, this is what happens. This is bothersome, obviously, for people and visitors. They have to start picking their way around this flooding. Unfortunately, that then causes erosion to the European protected heath. So instead of just the one path that we have, suddenly we've got three paths with two going around the flooding. When this dries up again, it doesn't make sense, but people will still continue to follow the braided lines and create more erosion. And also the effect of this is people are now walking into parts of the heather moorland where skylarks were nesting, meadow pipits, and so more people taking different lines on the reserve just causes more disturbance. So as I say, that was our perception, but we'll go on to the next one. Look, I've got a bit more about paths actually. The picture on the left there was at the end of last summer. So after we received the total number of visitors we would have expected in a normal year, we received in the first 3 months of lockdown last year. And by December, we had received over twice the number of visitors that Forvie would expect to see in a typical year. Unfortunately, when the summer was quite good last year, but at the end of the summer, it did turn wet. And that's one of our main routes. That'll be the path to Hackley Bay. And that's the effect of all these people with the wrong weather at the wrong time, and again leads to all that damage, which I am obliged to try and prevent. So fortunately, we've had funding the last 3 years, £25,000 every year for 3 years to correct some of the paths. The Heath Trail is the one that we've been working on, and we've created a short full loop now for people. In speaking to the contractor, it's designed a bit like a causeway, so it's raised up in case of flooding, minor flooding, so the path keeps dry and the habitat is not eroded. These paths have to be more robust to cope with all the numbers and mountain bikes and all that pressure. It has to last for a long time. We can't be, keeping spending all our time just patching up paths every year. So I've also applied now for another £90,000 for the next 3 years to try and fix the path along the top of the cliffs to Hackley Bay. So still just waiting for confirmation of that, but Nature Scotland has committed to improving facilities for visitors, for people getting outdoors. So I'm hopeful that we will get some money at least. The new financial year just starts at the end of next week. Okay, so but suggesting flooding is my biggest problem is slightly misleading you. If you go into the next one. Yeah, this is this took me by surprise. The most recent Met Office climate predictions indicate that yes, our winters will be milder and wetter, but the summers are predicted to become hotter and drier with more periods of drought. In fact, in Aberdeenshire has been identified as one of the prone areas, and the effects for agriculture in the area are quite concerning. Forvie seems to get its own little orange square there on the map. This is work done by one of our graduate placements in Nature Scot called Fairley Kirkpatrick Baird, so I'm grateful to Fairley. She has been working as a graduate placement to model drought events in Scotland, and I didn't ask her to put a little square specifically on Forvie, but she seems to have anyway. So while my perception was it was getting wetter, the science is actually saying the completely opposite effect. I couldn't have guessed that, I have to say. I don't know if that's your conclusion as well. Now, that's not to say that, of course, when it does rain, it rains a lot and it's raining harder, which doesn't help this localized flooding problem. If you go on to the next one, the effects of drought, what does that mean? Well, every single summer, Daryl and I, every weekend in the summer, we're just hoping that nobody drops a cigarette, nobody has a campfire that gets out of control, something else doesn't happen, because Forvie would just go up, wouldn't it? It's very dry, very old heather, and it would just be a nightmare for the emergency services to deal with. The heather would probably recover. Of course, it does like a bit of a burn. The Roseby willowherb, however, also loves burnt ground, so there's a risk that the Roseby willowherb would increase even more following a fire event. Never mind the damage to all the wildlife that's out there. So we're currently in an extreme dry period just now. I don't know if you've seen warnings out on social media, but as an example of these drought periods that are predicted, that more and more they're coming through from the Scottish Wildfire Group and warning us. And I don't know, when was the last time it rained? It must be over a week now, I guess. I was in Corryfee yesterday and I got sleeted on, but that's not quite the same. So fire, let's just hope this is not the year for the big fire of Forvie. And that entirely is in the hands really of people, visitors. We just have to try and get the message out for people to take extra care. However, I don't know if you all saw what happened on bonfire night at Newburgh last November. A fireworks set off down by the shore near the lifeboat station, and the damage that caused. So while people are being encouraged to go outdoors and make the most of their open spaces, and they can't get away on holiday, and while camping is on the increase, the risk is there as well. Heather beetle is the insect at the bottom there, and heather beetle can be quite devastating to to heather moorland. We haven't recorded it at Forvie so far. We did investigate it at one point, but decided actually no, it was just Forvie so windy and salty that the heather struggles to grow. It wasn't the fault of the heather beetle, but there is some concern that heather beetle might increase with milder weather. At the same time, the beetle larvae can be killed off by drought. So again, it might just be a combination. If we had the wrong weather or the right weather at the wrong time, there is that possibility that we may see heather beetle coming to Forvie. The rabbits are in there because they're actually quite helpful for the reserve. The rabbits help to keep the grass down, which allows the wildflowers to grow up. There's a concern, and this is an area which I am going to look into more this year, the effects of atmospheric nitrogen coming down onto the reserve and enriching, what should be, as you can imagine, a very nutrient poor soil, just sand, very good for wildflowers, but as it becomes enriched with nitrogen, maybe another reason that we're seeing the roseby willow herb and more grass is growing. Now, our rabbits, as I say, have done a really good job over the years, but our rabbit population has been decimated as well in recent years. Perhaps we think it's the rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus, which came into Britain following, it was a sort of naturally occurring virus on the continent, but it has mutated into really quite a devastating virus. So maybe not, hasn't come in again. Has it come in through climate change for warmer winters potentially? But considering other diseases and viruses which are on the increase, we're seeing certainly diseases in tree species spreading from the south northwards. So it's not, we can't rule out that something else will hit the reserve at some point. Okay, next one, thanks. So besides those, that list of key ingredients to Forvie that we monitor, we also do contribute to some other very interesting monitoring programs across the UK, which are quite helpful in showing up changes. The climate change and biodiversity kind of go hand in hand for us in Nature Scot. It's difficult to separate the two, and biodiversity is something that we need. Biodiversity just meaning a whole lot of different types of life, and trying to prevent extinctions and population crashes, because we know that having a rich biodiverse base for the nature reserve will help us cope with diseases and other changes. Also, we rely on the natural world just to help with things like air pollution, water pollution, bacteria even in the soil help clean things up. Our earthworms are in drastic decline and we need those to keep the soil healthy. So one of my favorites is the butterfly transect, which has been running for a long time at Forvie, and butterflies particularly helpful in showing up changes to our local climate because they're so temperature dependent. The butterfly there is actually the comma, which we haven't recorded yet at Forvie, but is on the increase in Aberdeenshire and has kind of moved northwards. So that's one to look out for this summer. They have started flying just now. There might be another brood later in the summer, so do have a look out for the comma. It's got quite raggedy wings. The caterpillar, now when I worked at St Cyrus down the coast back in 2002, one of our proud accolades down there was that these gorgeous stripy caterpillars and the striking red and black moths that they grow into were only found at the most northerly limit was at St Cyrus on the east coast of Scotland. Well, they turned up at Forvie 10 years ago and now they're doing very well. Again, can't say exactly how they turned up at Forvie, but they are enjoying the ragwort, which is their food plant on the reserve. I haven't done any visits further north of Forvie to see if they've spread even further. So if you are out at Cruden Bay or further north, have a look for these stripy caterpillars. They're very easy to identify, and you might find a ragwort plant that's just covered in hundreds of them. So very easy to identify. And if you do see them, then put in a record to the North East Scotland Biological Records Centre, or let me know and I can advise you. Now, seabirds, of course, have not been doing well in the North Sea, and we do contribute to the seabird monitoring programme. I've put in the herring gull there because they are yeah, they are detested by a lot of people, but I did like the photograph. But they also the photograph should represent the other seabirds such as the fulmar, kittiwakes, and guillemots that nest at Forvie. Maybe lots of factors for herring gull decline and other seabird numbers, in particular the food supply. But you know, these seabirds are also very prone to these storm events, and if they are struggling over winter to find enough food, and then there's a horrendous storm, well, we know what happens. Lots of guillemots in particular tend to get washed up in the estuary. So a bit of a worry for them there. Now, the seabirds that feed near the surface of the sea on plankton and small fish are the ones that are thought to be most at risk from climate change, and that does include our terns, our gulls, and the fulmars. So the results of our monitoring at Forvie, just to help show how badly things are doing, again, a bit like the eider ducks, and these are herring gulls that you just think are everywhere. Now, in 1998, we had 575 herring gull nests on the cliffs. 2019, higher or lower? Well, it was much lower. It was 37 nests. So a drop from 575 down to 37. There's something seriously going wrong, isn't there? Again, with herring gulls, are there other issues perhaps, you know, related to what's going on in the towns and cities? But that is a drastic drop. So we'll carry on, move on to the next one, and look at more seabirds and what they're eating. I just use the puffin because it's quite a good illustration of the sand eels. And you know, as you know, sand eels are absolute keystone species for the North Sea and our bird species. The puffins, we don't have puffins nesting on the reserve, but they're not far away. They're just north of Colliston. So this is a field of research which, again, I remember hearing about when I spent some time at the Marine Lab in Torry not long after graduating. And we're very lucky to have the Marine Lab close by, and they are providing fantastic data about what's going on with changes to surface water temperature from the coastline at Stonehaven. Ocean Lab had a buoy in the estuary too for a while, monitoring temperature and salinity, things like that. You might have seen a seal trying to get on top of it and having a snooze from time to time. But anyway, again, straying out of my particular area of expertise, but it has been really interesting, the reading that I've been doing to remind myself of this. The Marine Lab in particular, and it'd be quite good if you could get somebody to speak, I think, from the Marine Lab on this subject and the effect it's having on seabirds. But we are looking at surface temperatures of the northern North Sea increasing. And this ultimately has this knock-on effect on all of our birds and so many other species in the North Sea. The key thing is again, is the plankton, the microscopic species in particular that are associated with cold water that comes into the North Sea from the Atlantic. A particular plankton species, the Calanus finmarchicus, has declined by 70% since the 1960s. But the Calanus species that live in warmer water are moving further north, but they are nowhere near as abundant as the cold water species, and they've got less nutritional value for the sand eels and the small fish that feed on them. So danger there that this whole food chain might collapse just because of sea surface temperature. The cold water plankton, very important for sand eels, very important for birds, for seals, for other fish species. The factors affecting sand eels are twofold as well. So not only do the young sand eels that hatch out in the spring need to feed on the plankton, the adult sand eels actually go into sort of state of hibernation over the winter. So they're conserving energy while they're in this very dormant state over the winter in the cold water. However, with it warming up, they actually become more awake and they use up more energy over winter, which means when it's early spring and it's time to spawn, they're already exhausted and they don't have enough energy to reproduce. So two risks there related to the sand eels. Also, as I mentioned before, fish diseases and bacteria might increase with warm sea temperatures. So our coastal zone is a little bit at risk. So move on to the next one, a little bit more on the coast. Blue carbon is the term that is being applied to the amount of carbon that is stored and sequestered by the coast and the seas of Scotland. Again, another topic of research for a graduate placement called Caitlin Cunningham. So she sent me some good data on blue carbon, and talking about the not only the Eithin estuary, but our sand dune system is included in that as well. So just don't ask me about carbon accounting. I couldn't quite get my head around it all, but I'm sure somebody else will happily talk about it at length. But what Caitlin did send me, she sent me a few pointers. So, for example, so much work going on with peatlands at the moment in Scotland, which store maybe over 3,000 megatons of carbon, and the forests containing 50 megatons of carbon. The coastal contribution is a lot less than that, but it's still significant. Seas around Scotland storing 1,700 megatons of carbon in the form of calcium carbonate, and also in the skeletons of plants and mollusks and crabs. So you can picture the Eithin with its mussel beds and all the crabs and the winkles contributing to locking in that carbon from the atmosphere. Sand dunes as well. I didn't think sand dunes would have much to contribute, but here is the sum that Caitlin sent me to help illustrate it. So she tells me that short-haul international flights release 158 grams of carbon dioxide per passenger kilometre. If we apply that to flying from Aberdeen to Athens, 2,800 miles, one person flying is estimated to release nearly half a tonne of carbon dioxide. The Scottish sand dunes in total sequester over 100,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide each year. So that's the equivalent of flying from Aberdeen to Athens nearly 240,000 times. So that was slightly more impressive, and shows that we do have the sand dunes at Forvie and Fovren do have a role to play in capturing carbon, even though you might not think it. Okay, next one, please. Now, we've been worried, of course, about the Eithin estuary for many years, declared a nitrate vulnerable zone back in 2000, with the effect that this green algae has growing with all the nutrients in the water and sunlight. So if we do see drier summers with more sunlight, then that threat, even though the water quality is improving vastly, but will it be enough to keep up with the sunnier summers? This algal bloom smothers the mudflats and kills off the good food for all the birds that live in the mud underneath, the shrimps and the worms and things like that. We already know about the sand, of course, moving around. We've been a bit concerned that the sand sheet is moving and dropping into the Eithin estuary before it's washed out to sea again, so straight on top of some of our best mussel beds. Might only be a temporary smothering, but it could kill off mussel beds, which would take a long time to recover. Also, with the possibility that storm surges happen at sea and more water floods into the estuary, the mussel beds could be prone to that physical disturbance and just getting washed away, and young mussels not being able to recruit and attach and start forming the new mussel beds again. So there's a knock-on effect for those wading birds, the oyster catchers and our eider ducks. I looked into acidification of seawater to see if that was a big problem in Scotland, and less data available, but again, reports of predictions. The UK government report in 2017 did say, although there's a lot of variation in the data for acidification on the coastline, with the amount of carbon dioxide entering the sea, it could only be predicted that there will be a slight drop in pH of our sea temperatures, and more acid water would mostly affect the plankton again, first of all, those small crustaceans in the mud, and then eventually the mollusks and the bivalves, that their shells would just start basically dissolving. But I think that's a long way off. Okay, right, let's move on to what's happening. What can we actually do? So given all these threats, these risks, is there actually anything that we can do to try and mitigate and prepare for this? So, as I've said before, the biggest part of our job is managing people at Forvie. And if we can just provide refuges for the biodiversity, then that takes one level of disturbance out of the equation for them. If they're struggling enough as it is with what the climate's doing. I can't speak to the eider ducks and the mussels. They don't listen to anything I say, but I maybe stand a better chance speaking to the people. Doesn't always work, but that's what we can try and keep concentrating on, educating people, and subtly channeling people to where it's all right for them to go and keeping them away from places that we want to keep quiet. Of course, we saw, and I'm sure you felt it, I felt it last summer with our limited time outdoors and wanting to get to lovely places with open air and open space, but completely wanting to avoid anybody else. Lots of people have started heading off on their own onto the reserve and finding their own tracks and their own ways. And of course, that has been really important for people, but the effect that has on the badgers and the roe deer and the otters and, the animals that live out there all the time, they live every day thinking that they just want peace and quiet. So I hope we will recover from that after this kind of current craziness. Increasing biodiversity, we were talking about this as a team just earlier this week, that we've seen biodiversity plans come and go and different approaches to biodiversity, but we really recognise now this is something we'll have to prepare much better for and take more seriously. Very exciting news again last week, somebody saw a water vole back on the reserve. There haven't been water voles on the reserve for decades, but they seem to be back. I haven't seen one yet, but this could be the year that I do see them. So that is one of our priority biodiversity species, but they don't feature at all in the reserve plan at the moment. So we have to think how we can make sure. I mean, we have been helping out with trying to monitor for presence of mink, which is the biggest predator of water voles. So we have done our bit up till now. But all these other species, even from the ones I don't know much about, the fungi, the bacteria, we might have to start mentioning those as well as all those designated species that we have for the reserve. And monitoring, we can keep counting things, keep recording, keep taking photographs, and anybody can do that. Anybody can help out. And all this data will feed in to the scientists that are looking at things on the European scale or the national scale. So, everybody who goes out and does some recording is all very valuable. Okay, and the next one, thanks. Now, corporately, Nature Scot is committed to playing our part in reducing carbon in the environment. So my employers have announced this net zero plan to reduce our carbon emissions by and get to net zero by 2035. So I think it's great. It's great working for Nature Scot, and that we can try and lead by example, put our money where our mouth is. So Forvie, we've just had another report commissioned for the Forvie Centre. Although we have the wind turbine, we have a ground source heat pump, we're going to look at solar power next and try and reduce our electricity use for the building. We try to influence others through what we purchase. So everything we think about purchasing, asking contractors if they have an environmental statement, avoiding single-use plastics, thinking about how we travel. We have a travel hierarchy. Of course, the last year has really changed things, but it's also, we won't go back to the level of traveling that many staff did. And when we do travel, it's always really by public transport or car sharing. And also Nature Scot, of course, has this role to try and influence at national level land use policy, agricultural policy, and grant aiding and funding initiatives. The Green Tourism Business Scheme, I'll just mention that because I think this is a great scheme. Forvie got involved many years ago. This is a scheme run by Visit Scotland. So visitor attractions that have a Visit Scotland attraction rating can join the Green Tourism Business Scheme. And it's a great way, great source of information of all sorts of things to improve sustainability in the workplace, and things to buy or information to provide to people. So I've really enjoyed being part of that, and we do have gold level, and we've maintained gold level for many years now. We have our electric vehicle. We've got our first electric vehicle up at the Forvie Centre at Colliston with a charging point which is available to the public if our van isn't plugged in. And I think we're looking at getting another electric vehicle quite soon. So that's quite good. I think the last slide, you'll be pleased to hear, it's just how you can get in touch or find out some more information about Forvie or about Nature Scot, or get in touch with me with any comments, suggestions. Lots of things that could happen to the nature reserve, whether I'll see it in the 20 odd years I've got left there, or whether things will happen more quickly, we don't know. But you know, I feel a bit clearer now about the direction we're heading in and things I have to look out for, and really how to focus now on trying to help the wildlife as much as possible. So I hope you do as well. And yeah, just if you haven't already started doing these small things to help nature or to recycle or you consume less, then please do. I don't know if it's too late to reverse things, but we have to be hopeful, don't we, that we can make a difference, and we all can. So that's my summary of what I found out. I'm sure there'll be more. I could do this talk probably in a year's time, and I will have much more for you. So watch this space. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Annabel. I'm sure everybody's giving you a clap. That was really interesting. Thanks. It's really good to hear about just the local area, and you've obviously got so much knowledge about it. So thank you for sharing it with us all. We'll just go to any questions now. I think, Cara, were you going to go through any of the chat questions?
Yeah, please add questions to the chat. Annabel's here to try her best to answer, and if not, I'm sure she'll find out in the future. Cameron, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, I was just interested. First of all, thanks for the talk. That was brilliant, really interesting. I was interested when you were talking about the UK and the EU directives and what they align to within Forvie Reserve. And with us stepping out of the EU, presumably the EU directive would no longer apply, but I was concerned, how else are we then covering ourselves? Is there going to be UK directives or some such?
Okay, well, what I've been assured so far is, because what happens with the EU directives, each member state takes what the directive says and embeds it in their legislation of that country. So the European sites are protected under UK legislation, and so it would take a change in legislation to untangle that now. Now, that's not to say that that won't happen, of course, but currently the sites remain, they are protected under the same agreement that Scotland and the UK signed up to when they adopted the directive. So again, watch that space. And these directives are quite important in protecting the sites, particularly from development, golf courses, you know, things like that. So yeah, not less so much for people visiting Forvie. The site of special scientific interest gives us a bit of protection there. So yeah, hopefully what we have enshrined in legislation from the EU directives will stay with us, but it's a political decision, isn't it? We shall see.
Okay, thanks for that.
Okay, thank you very much. Kate, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, hello. Thank you very much.
Hi,
Annabel.
Kate.
That was really interesting. So I used to work for SMH starting in 1991. So
yeah, well, you tell me what you know.
No idea. I've no idea. I was based in Edinburgh. So, I didn't get outside much. I'm just really interested in this idea about sort of native plants being invasive on the dunes, because in my imperfect understanding, there is this thing called succession, and to how much are we trying to keep something in a state that it wouldn't naturally stay in anyway?
Absolutely, yeah, and that's the same question with the eider ducks and the geese and everything else. You know, are they moving naturally anyway? The Rosebery willowherb is an interesting one, and I'm still in a bit of a battle with the coastal advisors over this. It seems to be a very interesting plant, that it is a native plant, but has been contaminated with genes, North American genes, perhaps, which has turned it into a more invasive species. It also, of course, is known as the fireweed and spread out along the railways because of the burning of the embankments during the steam age. So it has perhaps spread in Britain with help from human beings as it is. And the fact that I'm missing the information about how long has Rosebery willowherb been at Forvie? Has it always been there? I just don't know. I don't have any records. So again, it's trying to work out. I failed the reserve because of Rosebery willowherb, because I followed the Joint Nature Conservation Committee, the JNCC, the UK body that decides what's in and what's out. I followed those instructions and decided we've got too much Rosebery willowherb. That's what it says. But apparently there is that discussion that can be had by the ecologists to try and work that out. Now, if we knew from aerial photographs, for example, that actually Rosebery willowherb has been on the dunes for the last 100 years, well, we wouldn't have aerial photographs, but you know, that would help, but we don't have that information. Similarly at Tentsmuir, where the landmass of the nature reserve has increased massively because the dunes have expanded towards the sea, we've got all this new land and it's covered in Rosebery willowherb. And I would say that's a clear indication that is a succession happening. That's this pioneer species has taken advantage of new ground, and the natural succession you think will lead to that dying off as something stronger comes in behind it. But the dunes at Forvie, where we're seeing it growing, it shouldn't be growing there. It's not right. And it's so invasive. It's taken over so much. So I failed it because it's worth asking that question. But can I get anybody to come out and help?
I don't know. Maybe there's people at University of Aberdeen who, in the archaeology department, who look at pollen records, and you know, maybe that would be one approach.
Possibly, but in the mobile dune system, there isn't the stratification. No, because it all moves.
Yeah, maybe there's a pocket somewhere that didn't move, but you'd have to find it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Bronze Age. Of course, we've got Bronze Age and medieval agricultural soil. So yeah, I don't think it's been there that long. My gut feeling is it's not right.
No.
But I've had some students looking into it. I'll try and get another one. Again, I'm interested in this aspect of nitrogen depositing and whether there's a link there.
Yeah.
And again, what do we do about it? What do we do about it? There's nothing, you know, to try and mechanically remove it. You know, take a tractor and something that would just destroy the dunes. So we can't do that. And cutting it down by hand takes forever. And so again, even if we decide it's not good, what do we do about it?
Yeah. A squad of explorer scouts.
Yeah, or we put livestock on, you know, we put soy sheep or cattle or something on the reserve, and again the trouble that will cause for people and dogs and things, and fencing. Yeah,
it's keeping you employed, Annabel.
Oh, it's so much fun. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kate.
Cameron, I believe you have a question about the seals.
Oh yeah, the seals. Yeah, it just occurred to me when you were talking about succession there and natural occurrence that the seals seem to be thriving much more than they have done in recent times. There's literally thousands of them down there, and I just wondered if you could offer some comment.
I wanted a buzzer to hit when somebody mentioned the S word. Thank you. Seals, I can only pass on, you know, what Marine Scotland, the Sea Mammal Research Unit, and our marine biologist in Nature Scot have sort of said to me. Now, the grey seal population of the North Sea has increased, but not massively. It has increased slowly following the removal of rights to shoot seals by salmon netsmen, fish farms, things like that. So it has increased slightly, but not massively. So we're not this isn't a new population of North Sea grey seals that have turned up at Forvie. These are grey seals that were always there, but have just now decided they prefer Forvie, perhaps to Tentsmuir again, where there was a large haul out. So as I say, I'm just passing on what they have said to me. It's the grey seals use the whole of the North Sea from Orkney down to the Netherlands. So again, they're not, they come to Forvie because it suits them. There's plenty of other places that they could go. Now, what suits a grey seal? Well, food is a big aspect of that, but it's not the Eithne. The River Eithne cannot possibly support 1,000 grey seals. They're not feeding. And I picked up seal poo for 3 years every month, which was fascinating, really good, and sent it off to St Andrews, where some unlucky students picked through it to work out what the seals were eating. And the results of that came back that they're feeding on North Sea species, sand eels, as I've mentioned, cod, pollock, saithe, the fish species. So that was quite interesting. They're maybe going out 50, 100 miles into the sea to feed, coming back and digesting, lying around on the beach. But then one of the scientists from the Sea Mammal Research Unit told me, we had a meeting in Newburgh, a public meeting in Newburgh, and he mentioned the fact that prawn trawlers are not allowed to land their bycatch at Peterhead. So the trawlers head past Forvie and dump small fish like small cod, pollock, any sand eels they've caught, they dump over the side as they're just trundling past the Eithne. So it's possible that the seals had been following the trawlers just with their mouths open, feeding on this bycatch. Some of them have cottoned on to the fact that the beach at Forvie is quiet for half the year and decided to stay, told their mates, and they've come in and stayed. You know, we know that they're not pupping. Grey seals still prefer to pup at the Isle of May and at Orkney. So presume it's a nice quiet beach for most of the year. Even the disturbance that they experience at weekends isn't enough, clearly, to put them off. And they're obviously still feeding well. So that's the explanation that I have just now, but yeah.
Plausible, so. Yeah, seems plausible.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for that, Annabel.
Okay, Vivian, would you like to have your question about the S word?
Was that me, Vivian?
Can we limit
Yes,
it to
Vivian.
maybe? Can we limit it to maybe 12 questions about seals?
No.
That'd be good.
I just have one. Sorry, I just have one question, which is, do you think that the seal colony on the Eithne estuary has any effect on what used to be a big eider colony?
No, again, I don't think so. You know, we've considered that, but the eiders have been declining since the 1990s, since well before there were any seals in any number at Forvie. We've tried to think, you know, right, are the seals eating? They're not eating the eider ducks, no. They're not in competition with the mussel beds. Eider ducks are still arriving. You know, the numbers have been going down and down, but you know, we still have nearly 2,000 eider ducks arriving in the spring. It's just that they then don't go on to nest. So that would indicate, I mean, often in ducks that indicates that they're not feeding well, that there is a problem with the mussel beds. But we haven't found that from the student projects that we have done. And we sent some ducks. There were some ducks that were found dead on the reserve. They were naturally killed by a fox. We sent those for the equivalent of a post-mortem. And it came back that they were very well fed. They had lots of fat on them, and it was just a predation event that had killed them. So no, I'm not concerned that the seals are in competition with the eider ducks.
Thank you. That's reassuring.
Good. If you've got any other ideas, then yeah, let me know.
No other ideas.
I thought about.
Any?
Sorry, I was going to say, I've thought about, you know, can I grow mussels? I wonder if I could increase, create mussel ropes offshore and just see if that helps. And I kind of hoped actually the offshore wind farm may benefit the eider ducks if they had lots of mussels growing, you know, on the legs. But it's probably a bit early to see any relationship there. Sorry, I'll shut up.
Not at all. Do we have any more questions?
We're running out of time now, so
No.
that's great.
Yeah.
That was really good. Thank
Oh,
you very much.
Kate has just popped in with a question.
Oh.
Oh,
Sorry, it's not
statement.
really a question. I'm just going to go and ask my other half what he knows about if any mussels are growing on the wind turbines, because he was one of the prime movers of why they got built in the first place, and he used to be an oyster farmer years and years ago. Not many people know that. I'll be back in a minute.
Yeah. I mean, it has to be more than just the food, because this issue is across the whole of Northern Europe, so it's not just Forvie. But you know, it's things like, you know, if we could give them more food, would that help with whatever it is that they're dealing with? If we could give them more refuge, would that help? It's obviously not where they nest, because they nest all over the place. So it's not like it's not as if the grass, you know, is too long. The rabbits haven't been eating enough. So yeah, I'm not sure.
Annabel, given the rarity of the little terns, what's your thoughts on actually intervening to give them a leg up?
Yeah, so my thought this year is we're going to apply for a license to Nature Scott. You know, I have got some friends in the organisation. We are actually going to apply for a license to chase an oyster catcher this year. So as it's setting up right where the little terns nest, and it's making a nest, we're going to try and chase it off. So to disturb, because all nests are protected in Britain, no matter what species. So, you know, we're no different. We would have to actually apply for a license to try and remove this oyster catcher nest. So that's a real problem. We've also decided we really need to try, although nobody's allowed near the ternery, the staff are still there once a day to check the electric fence. And it's quite often when we go around the electric fence, making sure nothing is stuck in it, the little terns get up and they're giving it laldy, and that's when the oyster catcher just strolls in and eats the eggs. So we're really going to try and reduce or change the way that we do that, and just see if that has any effect. I mean, this is so crucial. How, you know, how much disturbance or how little disturbance can have a big effect on these birds, never mind the weather. So yeah, every year we'll look into what we're doing. Little terns only feed within about a mile of where they nest as well, so they're very dependent on the sand eel population locally. So a few factors that have maybe caused the chicks not to make it the last few years. But yeah, we're absolutely committed to trying everything. I invented the little tern cage last year, which we've used with the eider ducks, putting a circle of mesh over each nest just to stop foxes going straight up, and they quite like to just bite the heads off the ducks. And I was going to try that with the little terns, just to try and stop the oyster catcher walking straight up to the nest. You've got to be innovative.
We wouldn't go to the stage of actually removing the chicken hand rearing or anything in place.
No chance. No chance. We're not paid enough to do that. No, I don't know. I don't imagine that'll actually be very successful. I can imagine, but yeah. No.
Okay, well, good insight.
Well, you know, not yet. I'm not ruling anything out, but yeah. And if you're volunteering, that would be good to know.
Brilliant to watch the little terns. You know, they're little characters to, you know.
Yeah.
They're not being able to reproduce over these years, you know.
I know. And then when you throw wildlife crime into that, and you think people are still trying to steal eggs for private collection, it's just crazy, isn't it?
Okay, Kate, we're all on the edge of our seats.
Oh yeah. Okay, well,
Okay,
the resident expert tells me that mussels establish really quickly, so it probably would only have taken a couple of seasons for the sort of bases of the turbines to be festooned. So I said, does he know if anybody's monitoring it? And he said, doesn't know, but you should ask Vattenfall.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, that's some kind of answer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've got, of course, JNCC and Nature Scott staff, normally based in Aberdeen, that are involved in the Aberdeen wind farm. So, yeah, I will ask them. But it's good to know they're quite quick growing. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. Is any more questions? Last chance, because we'll have to let Annabel go.
That's just really good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Annabel. Brilliant talk.
Brilliant.
Thank you. And yeah, we'll just keep your eye out, and we'll let people know over Facebook when we organise some more talks. Okay, thanks everyone
Great,
for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Annabelle.
you. Bye. 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 Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.